guys, it's Courtney. I'm back here with another design team project for Not Too Shabby. Today I'm going to be using the Jump for Joy stamp set by Neat and Tangled, and we're going to be making a very simple card, but with a little bit different technique, I guess you could say. So I'm going to start off with my background. I have a piece of Nina Solar White here, and this is cut down to 5 by 3 3/4, and I'm just going to be using some tumbled glass, Salty Ocean, Twisted Citron, and Lucky Clover Distress Oxide inks. And I'm using my blendability brushes here to just create a soft background. For my sky, I'm using the two blues naturally, and I'm just using the Salty Ocean towards the top and then blending that out a little bit with the Salty Ocean, which is quite a bit lighter. Then I'll flip my card panel around and I'm going to be adding my ground. And this is just going to be a background. I'm not doing anything any special anything to this really. It's not going to be too much of a scene like I normally do. So I'm going to start off with the Twisted Citron, like I said, towards the bottom, and I'm just holding the top of the paper with a scrap piece of paper so that I don't get fingerprints on it and I don't get ink on my fingers and transfer that to places I don't want it to go. And I'm adding a little bit of Lucky Clover on the bottom, and then again blending that out with the Twisted Citron. I'm going in with a pretty light hand. You don't need to add a ton of ink with these brushes. And I did have a little piece there that I didn't have any blue at all, so I'm just going to go back in without re-inking my brush there and just fill that area in. And then I'll put that panel aside to let that ink dry a little bit. I'm going to take another piece of the Nina Solar White, and I'm going to go ahead and stamp out my images with blackout ink by Ink on 3 because we're going to be doing some very, very simple Copic coloring for these. I'm going to be using all 3 of the little critters in the stamp set as well as the trampoline. I'm going to have all 3 of them jumping on the trampoline once everything is said and done. So once those were stamped out, we'll move right into the Copic coloring. And like I said, I'm going to keep this very simple. For the most part, I'm doing 3 color blends and choosing colors that blend very well together. So I'm going to start off with the squirrel, and I'm going to go right in with my darkest color just to add some shading. It's mainly going to be off to the left hand side because he's kind of tilted that way. And underneath his little chin there and where his tail is kind of tucked behind his body. I'm going to blend that out a little bit with the C3 and add a little bit of shading to the right side as well. And just blending all of those areas out, and then finally going in with the C1 and just filling in the rest of the area. I guess this is a little squirrel, so I'm going to color him gray. The squirrels that we have around here are gray. I know there's a lot of brown squirrels in other areas, but all of ours are gray. Moving on to the little bunny here, and I'm going to color him gray as well, but I'm going to switch over to some warm grays. Going to be doing my shading pretty much the same way as I did with the squirrel, going in with the darkest color and just adding a little bit to the left-hand side, blending that out with the W3, and then adding a little bit of shading to the right side as well, blending out all of those areas underneath his little face and where his legs are kind of kicked out a little bit, and a little bit on his ears. Then fill the rest of that in with the W1. Going to bring in my R20 to add a little bit of color to the inside of the bunny's ears as well as his little belly there and the squirrel's belly too, just because I felt like that needed a little something, even though squirrels don't have pink bellies. Well, neither do bunnies really. But moving on to this little guy here, going to be using some E30 markers for the entire thing. For the body itself, going to be using a little bit lighter of a combination than I am for his little fur, I guess you'd call it. And just starting off with my lightest color to kind of map out my darkest areas so that in case I mess up, I can just cover that up. Again, just using a 3-color blend here, and I was initially going to use a 3-color blend for his fur as well, and I'm just going to go 1 shade darker with everything. But the E35 was very, very similar to the E33 that I ended up bringing in the E31 again for my highlight color for this particular area. I'm doing my shading on the left-hand side of his fur and where it's kind of indented in, I guess. On the right side, I'm just putting one little flick mark to kind of give his hair some texture or some movement. And next we'll move on to the trampoline. I'm going to start off with the center of the trampoline, and I want this to appear black. Oh, I did add a little color to their cheeks as well with that R20. So I'm going to, like I said, start off with the center, and I'm going to start off with my black marker. And I'm just going to be adding some shading on either side of the trampoline itself and towards the bottom, or I guess where it's closest to us, I should say, because the top portion of it, or the top portion of the image itself, would be the lightest. So I'm just going to go one line with my black marker, then bring in my C7 and extend those areas out. I am using a flicking motion because this is a larger area, and I just find that I get a better blend that way. Next, going in with the C5 and just leaving a very small area for that C3 where that highlight is. For the legs of the trampoline, I'm just going to color those in black because they're so teeny tiny that if I did any shading, I was too scared that it was going to bleed. So for the outer part of the trampoline, I guess, I don't know what you'd call it, the frame maybe, I wanted to bring in some bright colors. So I'm going to be using some RV markers. I'm going to get the paper saturated a little bit with my lightest color. Then I'm going to go in with my darkest color, and I'm just doing a little bit of shading on each one of those little sections. And I did use 4 colors here simply because the RVs, I have a hard time blending with those. Sometimes they kind of pick up too much of the color that you used before that. So I find that using 4 colors kind of eliminates that a little bit. But just finishing off with my lightest color again, blending out all of those each section. And you can see I got a little bit on the trampoline portion itself, but I'll fix that in a minute. For, I guess this would be the frame underneath, I want this to appear black too. So I'm just going to be doing a little bit of shading with the black, C7, C5, and C3, just concentrating the highlight being in the center. And I'm barely touching the paper here because this is such a teeny tiny area. But I did take that C3 and go over that same highlight area there to kind of lighten up that pink where I went out of the lines. So I went ahead and die cut these, and I'm kind of just placing those around my panel to see which animal I want in the center. I ultimately decided that the brown should go in the center instead of having 2 grays directly next to one another. And I wanted to create a shadow for the trampoline so it's not just floating there. And Frankie kept getting in the way here, so I apologize. You're not going to see everything, but I used a C5, C3, and C1 before I adhered this down just to create a little bit of shadow to kind of ground this a little bit. And then I'll go ahead and pop that up with some Scotch foam tape. And he's like right in the camera. He's like totally fascinated with what I'm doing. So eventually he does get kicked off the table because he was just being way too bad. So I popped up the trampoline with Scotch foam tape, and I'll also pop up the little bunny and the squirrel with Scotch foam tape. And I think this is a hedgehog maybe. I don't know what this is, but we're putting this aside for right now. Next, I'm going to just take a scrap piece of the Nina Solar White using that RV06 to color that in for my sentiment panel so that it matches the trampoline. Treating that little strip with my anti-static tool, and then I'll go ahead and stamp my sentiment with Versamark ink, just centering that right onto that little strip there. Sprinkling on some white embossing powder, and then I'll go ahead and heat set this. Now I didn't worry about coloring in the sides because those are going to be trimmed off eventually anyway, but you will want to make sure that your heat gun is totally heated up for about 30 seconds or so before bringing it to the paper. With a little strip like this, it won't make too much of a difference, but a larger piece of cardstock, it kind of minimizes any warping that you may have from that heat. So I kind of placed that on my panel to see how long I wanted it to be and trimmed off the sides, and I'll even those out in a little bit here. Next, I'll go ahead and adhere my panel to an A2 size note card with my Tombow Mono Multi Glue. And for my little middle guy, I'm going to call him a hedgehog because I don't know what he is for sure. But I didn't have any of the action wobblers. So I decided to create my own. So I have a piece of heavyweight cardstock here, and you have to use heavyweight for this. And I didn't have a a circle die that was small enough. So I just traced the inside of my Scotch foam tape and cut out my circle. And look, I think this is a 120-pound cardstock that I'm using. And I just kind of lined that up to see if it was smaller than my little hedgehog. It wasn't, so I had to take a little bit off there, and that fit perfectly. So I'm going to just cut a spiral. I'm going to start with a little notch there and just cut a spiral all the way around till I get to towards the center of that little circle. And then I'm going to use, it's best if you use wet glue here because you do have to kind of play around with this a little bit to make sure that it works. And using wet glue will allow you a little bit of time to do that. And you'll see that it did take me a little bit of time to get this right. But I'm going to adhere one side of that little spiral to my little hedgehog itself. And then I will add glue to the middle part. And you want to make sure that you're not using too much where your glue is going to spread, because then it's just going to be a flat circle again if that happens. I'm going to go ahead and pop that up onto my card panel, and it was kind of crooked. So I had to peel up a little bit more of what I stuck to the image itself so that it would go evenly on my card. Like I said, this is something that you just have to kind of play with to kind of get an idea, and it will depend on the image and the size of the image as far as how much you have to stick down, how big your circle needs to be, and how much adhesive you'll need to use. So once I finally got that down and my glue was completely dry, I could go ahead and it worked perfectly fine. And this will lay completely flat when you need to mail the card. So once that was done, I went ahead and cut better lines here, as straight as I can get them. And I took some Scotch foam tape to adhere that just to the top portion of my panel. And this was still looking a little too plain. So there's some other images in the stamp set to kind of mimic them jumping, I guess. And there's two that are curved and one that's straight. So it worked out perfectly. Went ahead and stamped those with my blackout ink just because it was sitting right there. And then there's also a little heart in the stamp set. So I'm going to go ahead and stamp that with some Hero Arts ink. And I believe this is called Ultra Pink. And this matches that RV marker that I used pretty well. And I'm just going to stamp a couple of those. And then I'll take my Nuvo Aqua Shimmer pen to add some sparkle to the trampoline and to the inside of those little hearts. That is it, guys. Thanks a lot for stopping by. Have a great day. Bye.